Okay. Okay, so I want to make sure everyone can see the deck that's on the screen. I could just get a quick hand raise. Great. Okay, thank you. So the format of this meeting will be similar to the format of the last two. We will have a brief presentation and then we will allow time for comments and Q&A. I will let the presenters of the other project partners introduce themselves when it's their time to speak. And then we will call on individuals that have their hand raised when it is time for comment. So with that, we are going to get started. Next slide, please. So this is the agenda of the meeting. We will go through each of the project partners' visions, history of the site, and then where we are on the project timeline, and also additional engagement and public input. Next slide. Okay, so the overall vision for this project is there's many. On the city side, we are very keen on delivering mixed income housing. For Whitney, expanding a world-class cultural institution. We are securing essential space for the High Line through New York City parks with a focus on expanding their space as well. We are supporting the transition of the Gansevoort market co-op vendors, and also we see this as an opportunity to really address some dire public realm needs in and around the site. Next slide. So, the other way.
Yes, sorry.
So to start off, a very recent history of this particular site. Back in 2009 is when the High Line opened to the public, and the Whitney Museum of American Art and the city signed a contract for sale at their current home at 99 Gansevoort Street. The Whitney opens about 6 years later in 2015. And then a short while ago, EDC, Whitney Parks, and Friends of the High Line, as well as the Meat Market Co-op, began discussions on the future of this site. And beginning last fall, we have begun engagement on what on the project that we are presenting to you today. Next slide, please. Here is an aerial view of the site as it exists currently. Next slide. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about our housing goals. The city is very committed to achieving a goal of 50% affordable housing on this site without utilizing additional government subsidy. We are utilizing a cross-subsidy model, which I will go into more detail later in the presentation. We are going to comply with a new state program called 485X, which mandates that 25% of the affordable units must have an average of 60% AMI. This will be explicitly stated in the housing RFP. We are seeking some additional feedback from the community on the remaining 25% of the affordable, what you would like to see that those affordability levels to be. And you know, the city is also extremely committed to delivering affordable housing throughout the city of New York, in all neighborhoods, in all boroughs. And we see this as an opportunity to really drive affordable housing production in Community Board 2. Next slide. So a little bit about what a cross-subsidy model is. So this is a funding approach that uses the value of the land and the market rate rents to pay for the construction of the below market housing units. And this value is achieved by the market rate units that is then reinvested into the project to fund the affordable units, that not only for the cost of construction, but also the cost of continued maintenance and continued affordability. And so the city is contributing the land for the development, and the value of the land will offset the lower rents on the affordable units. And a little bit later, we will give you some figures that show, you know, what a rent in an affordable unit would be approximately. Next slide, please. So why use a cross-subsidy model? The way to build affordable housing, I think, that most people are used to is through HPD, which is the city's agency of housing preservation and development. They have a very long funding pipeline. The wait after ULURP approval, which is like a land use approval from city council, can be up to 10 years. There is also a limit on the amount of subsidy HPD can provide each year, and that limit has to be distributed citywide. And so there is already a very long wait list for these projects. You know, decisions need to be made on which neighborhoods and which sites to prioritize, and using a cross-subsidy model for projects and locations that really where we can leverage market rate rents or value of the land is another tool in the toolbox that we can use for the city to really address the generational housing crisis that we're facing now. And meatpacking and Manhattan, this part of Manhattan does have a very strong housing market, which we think allows the market rate units to subsidize the affordable units. Next slide, please. So now I'll pass it over to the Whitney to explain a little bit about their vision for the project.
All right, thank you, Gigi. My name is ID Arwede. I'm Deputy Director at the Whitney. I'm coming to you from the Whitney, from the museum building right now. And I'm really excited to be a part of this project and excited for the possibilities that this project, I believe, will enable. I can't see anyone. I see there are 50-something people on. I can't see you, so bear with me. Hopefully you can see me. I'm just talking to a screen, but we'll do my best to hopefully get the message across. Again, thanks for allowing the Whitney to be a part of this and giving us a chance to share our vision. Professionally, I'm certainly very excited for what this will mean for the Whitney in terms of our ability to continue to and to more fully deliver on our mission serving our audiences. And also personally, as I've mentioned in prior briefings, this also resonates very deeply with me as a member of the community who's lived in this community for the last 18 years. But talking about our vision for the future, I always start with the Whitney turns 100 years in 2030. So we're about 95 years old now. And in those 95 years, the Whitney has been in 4 different locations across the city, actually starting right downtown here on West 8th Street in 1930. And each of the times the Whitney has had to move, we've had to move because there was no possibility to grow in the community that we were in at the time. And of course, grow we have, and in so many ways, the Whitney is serving so many more people and doing so many more things for more varied communities today than it did 95 years ago, which is wonderful. But when we moved downtown and made the decision to move downtown back in 2009 and opened downtown in 2015, we did know that if we got things right and we did it right and served our audiences and met their needs in all the right ways, we would have a need to grow at some point in the future. And so that had always been something that we'd been thinking about and planning for, and hoping that we would be able to stay in this community for the long term. And alas, here we are. So we're excited that this is a possibility at this juncture. So A big part of the expansion for us will be, again, the ability to expand our galleries, expand education spaces, expand program spaces. One of the things I've said is that as museums, the ways in which we're called upon to serve our audiences and our communities have evolved quite a bit than they were not just 100 years ago, but even 25 years ago, I would say. And art museums are, of course, always about art and galleries and art on walls and paintings, as many of you know. But we're also about serving people. We're about serving communities. We're about public programs. We're about community programs in so many ways that require a certain kind of physicality to deliver on that in an effective way. And we've seen that work really well in the building that we're in, and we've seen ourselves be embraced by the community in really meaningful ways, which means that we're doing more and more. So when this building was built, it was built with the expectation that we would serve 800,000 visitors a year. This year, we're on track to do 25% more than that, over 1 million visitors. We've served as many as 1.3 million visitors in certain years in this building. So, and we're routinely turning people away for some of the programs where we can't fit people. In terms of education spaces in our current building, we serve thousands of K through 12 students across the city of New York each year, many from Title I schools. And yet we have only one dedicated classroom space, one dedicated art making space. So again, we're routinely turning people away in our existing facilities. The Whitney is an educational institution, so serving educational purposes, both for student-aged young people and for adults, is an important part of our mission. And then, finally, we know that this site is the only viable contiguous site for a Whitney expansion. It's the only place we could meaningfully expand where we are, as we sort of thought anticipated 15 years ago. So it's a very exciting opportunity for this to hopefully be coming to reality. The other thing I will say is so much of the Whitney's focus is on serving our audiences. The Whitney, since Scott Rothkopf, the museum's director, CEO, stepped into his role a little over a year ago, he has really energized and reinvigorated our focus on growing our audiences, on diversifying our audiences, and on serving those diversified audiences more fully and serving them better. In practical terms, what does that mean? What have we done in the last year to do that? We can go to the next slide. A big part of the vision and the focus for growing our audiences has been around expanding access. So just in the last year, we've launched 3 of our most expansive and exciting free admission programs in the 100-year history of the Whitney, or 95-year history of the Whitney. In January of 2024, we launched free Friday nights and free second Sundays, which meant that starting a year ago now, the Whitney is free to everyone every Friday night from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. Whoever you are, wherever you come from. And that's been really wonderful. In addition to that, we're now free every second Sunday of the month, again, all day to everyone once a month. And what we've really seen in those 2 programs, which launched a year ago, is such a growth in our audience, both in the size of our audiences and in the makeup of our audiences. So one stat I like to quote is that on Friday nights, for example, not only are we seeing 2 to 3 times our regular volume of audiences, but on Friday nights now, 60% of our audiences, 60% of people who attend on Friday nights are people of color. That is literally unheard of for a contemporary art museum. But it's been a very intentional thing on the part of the museum. And it's been really, really wonderful to see us serving more audiences and serving different audiences than you typically think of for a traditional contemporary art museum. Now, just a month ago in December, we added another big piece to our free admission program. Starting in December of 2024, less than a month ago, the Whitney is now free to everyone aged 25 and under, all day, every month, all year long. We're always free to everyone 25 and under, which is really wonderful. And over the holidays, this launched in mid-December. Over the holidays, I just got the numbers earlier today, fully 1 in 4 visitors who came to visit the Whitney over the sort of 2-week holiday period was between the age of 19 and 25. So it really has driven that audience for us. So these are the audiences that we have in mind as we think about expanded physical spaces and how we serve our audiences. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Again, it's all about connecting art and audiences. We've got 10 years of history in this building. many more years of history working with audiences and communities in this neighborhood. And really, our work is not just about, as I mentioned, traditional galleries with art hanging on a wall, but it's really about serving artists and meeting artists where they are. So this is an installation view of the last Whitney Biennial. I hope many of you on this who are on the screen saw this exhibition. And it's really about having physical facilities that can accommodate the diverse needs of living artists who are practicing today. So you can see how our galleries are flexible and adaptable for both what our audiences need and also what the artists we serve need. We can go to the next slide. Again, connecting art and audiences here. We believe that art does not belong necessarily just on a wall or in a building. Art derives its meaning from the community and communities that it comes from, the communities our artists live in, work in, the communities around us. Art, is not within our four walls, it's all around. Here's an example of, our program spilling out into the community and spilling out into the streets. This is an installation view of an activation by the artist Kara Walker. The caravan there is by the artist Kara Walker. You can see Gansevoort Street in this instance closed with audiences sprawled all across Gansevoort Street and across the west side. It's very much an example of the kind of thing that the Whitney is able to do, granted with some constraints, given the nature of our current building, but the ways in which we're able to serve our audiences and communities in non-traditional ways, but also in ways we're able to energize our immediate community. And so it's the kind of thing that we hope that we're able to do more expansively and more effectively for our communities in an expanded facility in the years to come. I believe that's the last slide, and I will hand it back. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, ID. So Joe is up next from Highline.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joe Tarver. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Friends of the Highline. I'm joining you tonight from the Highline's Maintenance and Operation Building, which is adjacent to the Whitney. We're also excited about the possibility to expand the Highline's Maintenance and Operation Building to meet the growing demands of the park and increase our impact on New York City. Excuse me. A little background on us. We're a nonprofit and we hold a license agreement with the Parks Department to maintain and operate the park. Last year was our 25th anniversary of our founding by local community activists Joshua David and Robert Hammond. This next June, it will be 16 years since the first section of the park opened. Back then, it was estimated that we'd have about 350,000 visitors each year. This past year, we had almost 7 million visitors. To operate this park, we must raise each year from private sources almost 100% of the park's operating budget. Today, almost 16 years later, the park is 3 times longer than when it first opened. So that means we're about 1.5 miles long. So now, not surprisingly, we have a number of limitations with our maintenance and operations building, which is, by the way, owned by the Parks Department and sits on city land. So 16 years later, we're not able to have all our staff in the building on the same day because there's not enough workspace for everyone. We also don't have enough space for the fabrication of the public art that you see on the High Line, or to store the equipment we need to operate the park. And we're also not able to build up the attic stock of key parts and materials we need to make routine repairs because of the space limitations. We also know there's a demand for educational programming year-round and not just during the warm months out on the park. With indoor space, we could run programming during all 4 seasons, and go deeper with the local community and New Yorkers from all 5 boroughs. Some specifics about our plans for expansion. We envision 2 floors being built on top of this building, and expanding north about 30 feet into what is now the Meatpackers courtyard. So for us, expansion will address 2 pressing needs. One is space to better support the needs of the park, and 2, year-round programming, so we'll have the opportunity to dream bigger about the future and better serve all of you. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Joe. Next slide, please. John Jobagi typically would speak to the Gansevoort Meat Market, and unfortunately he can't join us this evening. But John is a 4th generation butcher at the Gansevoort Meat Market and is the president of the co-op. In conversations with the co-op and the city, the co-op has elected to leave their site early. I think this decision was based on a couple of factors. One, that there have been changes in the industry and the building is extremely old. It was designed originally for kind of the push carts to be inside, I believe in the 1950s. So the infrastructure has become increasingly challenging, and the freezers and the maintenance and operations have also become increasingly challenging for the vendors. And so the 7 meat packers in the coffee shop wholeheartedly support this project, and the city is supporting them in their transition. And they recognize that they are not the future of this site. It is not a surprise that there would be development on this site. And so they are in support of this project. And I think many of you heard him speak at previous meetings. So next slide, please. So what you see on this slide is a negotiated site plan. What you'll see in purple on the bottom of the left image is existing Whitney. On top is Whitney expansion. Similarly, in the orange box to the left, you'll see the existing Highline maintenance and operations space and the expansion that Joe was talking about, primarily about 2 floors above. You'll see a new open space that's in green up top, and then a footprint on the top corner, which will be the future housing site. And then the pink overlapping triangle you see is actually state DOT jurisdiction land that we have been in communication with state DOT on, that they will, with an agreement, let the city DOT manage that area so that we can address, we can have a contiguous site and also address some of the public realm challenges along 10th Avenue, Little West 12th Street and Gansevoort Street, which I'll also talk about a little bit later. And the image on the right is a image of building envelopes. So what does that mean? It means there is no architect yet for this project. There's no developer yet for this project. But this is the box, so to speak, that that the expansion of each of the project components have to be designed within. So think of this wireframe as sort of the outer limits of what can be built for each of the project pieces, components. Next slide, please. So looking forward, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about process and where we are in this process. EDC intends in the end of January to release an RFP. What is an RFP? It is basically a document that the city issues that lays out all of the terms and conditions and criteria that we would like developers to meet and essentially bid for this project. And the proposals are evaluated based on their ability to meet the requirements and advance the goals reflected in the competitive criteria of the document. And like I mentioned before, one of the top priorities will be to meet a goal of 50% affordable housing. And it is through this RFP and reviewing all of the interested applicants that EDC will be able to select a developer for the housing portion of the site. After that, there will be environmental review and preparation for a process called ULURP, which stands for Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. ULURP is a process that's memorialized in the city charter to make sure there's transparency and accountability for projects that require land use actions. Can you go to the next slide? And we are targeted to start the ULURP process in 2026. And it is a process that can take anywhere between 7 and 9 months. And it involves review from many individuals and groups. Next slide. Starting with the community board, which this lot is in community board 2, and then goes to the borough president, then the city planning commission, and then we'll also require full city an approval by the city council. And so we are targeting for ULURP to begin in 2026 and approval in 2027. And so I want to be clear that construction cannot start before city council review and approval. This typically in large and small land use projects, there are modifications that are made throughout the engagement process leading up to ULURP and certainly during ULURPs. And want to stress that we are at the very early stages of engagement and very early stages of this project. Next slide, please. So this is the third and final public session tonight. Next slide. And now we're going to transition into areas of public input. And one of the areas of public input is affordability. Here you'll see how affordability is defined by extremely low income and their representative bands of area median income. So on this chart on the left-hand side, you'll see sort of the range of actual income of individuals or families, and the 1, 2, 3, 4 across the top represent the household sizes. So I had mentioned previously that 485X requires 25% at 60% AMI. So if you look at the 60% AMI line, you will see the income requirements for a single individual at $65,220, or a family of 4, $93,180, which would represent the income for individuals or families to apply and for the future lottery of one of the affordable housing units at the 60% AMI. And so just to give you a comparison, the median household income in New York City is just over $79,000, and the median household income in the West Village is just over $153,000. Next slide, please. And then what you'll see here is the monthly rent of the different size units based on your family composition of the AMIs. And to just reiterate from before, the cross-subsidy model not only will assist in financing construction of the building, but part of the equation here is that it will also have to continually finance the subsidized rents of the affordable units and the maintenance of the building. So the questions that we are proposing tonight is what are the AMI bands that the community wants to see at Gansevoort Square? And then also, do you have a priority for deeper affordability, which means lower AMI bands, or maximizing the total number of units that are below market rate rents? So the deeper affordability would mean you'll see very low is considered 40% AMI. So for 45X, if you're averaging at 60% AMI, you could split the 25% into 3 categories evenly between 40% AMI, 60% AMI, and 80% AMI, which then allows you to reach the very low income individuals and families for an opportunity to be able to apply for the affordable units. So that's an example of prioritizing deeper affordability. I know that in the previous sessions, a lot of the questions have been focused around affordability, and it didn't leave a lot of time for the other areas that we wanted input on. So I'm just going to go very quickly through the remainder of the categories of where we want community input, and then folks can sort of choose what topic they want to comment on or make comments just generally about the project and other priorities. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the other issues we wanted to raise very quickly are public realm, because we will see an activation of corridors along Little West 12th Street as well as along 10th Avenue. Slide. And we want to think about what priorities you may have for street, sidewalk, and open space improvements. For example, we will have ground floor use, and we want to get feedback on whether you think that should be prioritized for a community facility or neighborhood retail. We know that, next slide, please. We know that 10th Avenue currently is very much used for pickups, drop-offs, vehicles only, and has been challenging to connect the north-south experience on 10th Avenue. So, how can this corridor be better connected and integrated? How do you see, a new functioning 10th Avenue with the new uses proposed? Next slide. The next area is design. What elements in the surrounding context do you believe the building should take architectural cues from? Next slide. Examples of buildings that may be inspirational. Next slide. And then also thinking about sustainability and resiliency measures, which include measures like solar panels, green roofs, and anything else in addition to that. So with that, we are happy to take questions. Great, I believe that's the end of the presentation. So please put your hand up. We'll call on you one at a time. Just please be respectful of everyone's time. We do want to be able to have everyone who wants to speak to have an opportunity to do so. So please be brief. Great. So I'm just going to start from the top with Joanne Castillo. Can you unmute?
Hi, this is David Gordon. Did you get the right person?
No, but since I've unmuted you, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thank you again for this presentation. This was really great. I'm very excited about this project bringing together all of the different stakeholders thus far. To the extent that I have a question, it's going to be that is that 600 total unit fixed? Is there a possibility for additional units here, or is this sort of a fixed number that you're revolving around? But before you answer that, I would just like to add a comment that New York City is obviously facing a housing crisis, and to me, housing is the #1 priority for what is needed in New York City, and so I'm very excited about this project. I know that there will be commentary towards the idea that this project will be out of context, specifically the tower that will make up the housing, and given the slide that you posted in terms of design, there are already plenty of buildings along the west side spanning from about where we are in the meatpacking all the way to Hudson Yards that are of equivalent size and design. And so I would encourage EDC and those who have a stake in this to really understand that the most important thing here is housing, and that for those who say that this is out of context or this needs to be stopped or slowed down, they're really just trying to stop the housing. So again, that's just my comment. And I would like to just, again, ask, is 600 fixed? Is there a possibility for more? Is there a possibility for less?
Sure, I'll let Kevin answer that question.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Nice to be with you all. David, thank you for the question. We're happy to hear that. There has been, as you noted, a lot of commentary about the height. But as you noted, we are in a very serious housing crisis for the city, and we're happy to be bringing a combination of both market rate and truly affordable housing to this site, and doing it in a way that doesn't rely on the city to, one, provide subsidy, and doesn't have to wait for that subsidy to be available, which, as Gigi mentioned, could be up to 10 years. So if it's possible from an architectural perspective, there may be more units possible on the site. I think the key piece, and Gigi mentioned this, is that the city is going to, or EDC is going to release an RFP for developers to respond with their proposals of what they see as possible for this site. And it's only after designating a developer will we have the beginnings of a design of a building. So right now we have a site plan and we have an envelope, and we're excited to see how developers respond and come back to us.
Thank you, Kevin. I apologize in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name. Next is Richard Lodgett. I'm sorry, I don't think I got your name right.
Richard Lodgett. I'm a longtime Greenwich Village resident. I just have a very brief comment. The size really is overwhelming for that site, and will just really overwhelm, or kind of much too much for the meatpacking district. It would be very nice if you could have more affordable housing. Affordable housing is great, and the mix of all that high-end housing. There's so much of that going on already. I just don't see the need for it. I would hope also that the affordable housing would be permanent, and that would be written into the contract for the site. And finally, I hope you'll slow this down so people can see what's going on, so that people can see what the RFPs are. I hope so. Anyway, my big concern is the size of the project. So I hope you can scale that back. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Next will be Zach Weinstein, followed by Katie Bordenaro.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good,
Yes.
thank you. Yeah. My name's Zach Weinstein. I'm with Save Gansevoort. I live at Horatio and Washington Street, 2 blocks south of the proposed development. I've attended both of the two previous engagement meetings, public engagement meetings. And Ms. Lee, in the course of those two meetings, you've repeatedly said that we're at the very beginning of this process, that nothing is set in stone until the city council votes at the end of the ULURP process. But that's in fact not the case. The RFP, I asked this question of you, I think, at the first public engagement meeting, and you confirmed that the RFP will in fact set in stone the essential elements that will determine the fundamental nature of this project. The site plan, which mandates a very small footprint for the tower, very, very limited space for the residential uses. And secondly, the cross-subsidy model, which mandates a huge tower containing a huge amount of market rate luxury housing. The Economic Development Corporation must delay issuing the RFP until there has been time for genuine public input on these two key issues. There needs to be 100% permanently affordable housing on this rare city-owned super lot. I'm struck that what you described is in the course of an 8 to 9 month negotiation between the city, the Whitney, and the High Line about developing the site plan. At no point was the community notified, involved, given any opportunity to participate. And I hope that our friends from the Whitney and the High Line are still listening. In the past, there's been good community outreach from these institutions, particularly from the Whitney, on issues that impact the surrounding area. I am surprised and concerned that in the course of this 8 to 9 month negotiation, they never once insisted that the public participate and have input. Respect and support need to be a two-way street, and I hope that going forward, these institutions will be sensitive and will work with the surrounding community to make sure that we get the best possible outcome for the site, that their needs are taken care of, that there is the maximum amount of permanently affordable housing, and that we end up with a structure that is in context with the surrounding area and respectful of the surrounding historic district. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Katie?
I've unmuted and I think you can hear me.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you so much. I've had many opportunities to talk to you about everything, and I'll have more, I'm sure, as a member of the community board. But I actually have a very fact-based question. In looking at the plan, I don't seem to recall what is going to happen to the existing High Line operations building. Is that going to have to be taken down entirely? And then, new construction? It's not clear to me from in my memory or the pictures that you've shown, the renderings you've shown so far.
Joe, do you want to take this question?
The building, the current 4-story building is built structurally that it can take additional floors on top. So as I said in my, and by the way, this building is a Parks Department building sitting on city land and will remain a Parks Department building. And so the plan is to add 2 floors to the top and expand 30 feet out into what is now the Meat Packers parking lot, which is adjacent to the maintenance and operations building. There would have to be some changes on the layout on the floor, the current floors, but the current building would not be pulled down.
Thank you. I think that has been explained before, but it just takes on new meaning when we see, in each iteration of the talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie. Next is Janine, followed by Catherine.
Hi, good evening. This is Janine Kiley with Community Board 2. This long-owned, city-owned site is a huge opportunity for building affordable housing. And the current plan that you've presented has 75% of the footprint of the site used for the Whitney, both a building at 58% and the open space that they will control for another 17%. I know that the first speaker talked about how do we get even more housing? And I guess the question is there a consideration for the Whitney shrinking its footprint or building something adjacent to the, so we can get a larger footprint for more housing?
ID, do you want to speak briefly to sort of the intent around your layout and your proposed
Yeah.
footprint?
Yeah, certainly happy to. Thanks for the question, Janine. So what, you know, and the gentleman before you also mentioned the question about, you know, months of planning, negotiations and planning. I would say there've been less months of negotiations and more months of planning and looking at the pieces of the puzzle and really trying to figure out how the multiple intended uses and priorities for the site across certainly the city's need for housing, the High Line and the Whitney could fit and work on this site. So for example, Joe from the High Line talked a moment ago about being able to build on top of what they have right now and extending 30 feet out. Part of that also actually includes building on top of what they have right now involves the Whitney giving up some of the space that we have on our 5th floor outdoor terrace and sitting that to the High Line so they can build on top of it, and that which then optimizes how we use the physical sort of footprint of the site. So it's been a bit of a Jenga thing trying to figure out how they all fit. And that's what many of the last few months have been. And the starting point really was, could all these uses coexist on this site, frankly, right? And work. And a lot of what we've done over the last year at the Whitney specifically has been studying what would be required for a successful expansion. Remember that, you know, a contemporary art museum needs certain kinds of floor plates to actually work and be functional, both for the programs we run, the art we show, but also for visitor circulation and for effective circulation and programming. We have the experience of having learned from 10 years of history in this building what the shortcomings have been. And frankly, one of the big shortcomings has been circulation, specifically, has been the fact that we cannot split galleries into 2 shows and actually have visitors go through them effectively. So a lot of the study was trying to figure out how we accommodated multiple uses on the site while also having the possibility for a Whitney expansion that would actually work, that we could also then go out and have a successful fundraising campaign around to help build this thing at some point. So it was very much, I think someone said in the briefing yesterday, the site plan you see is not the perfect site plan. It doesn't work perfectly for every party, but it works well for all parties in many ways. So
well, I'm just saying your current footprint is 33,000 and change, and the new one, the additional site would be 38,471. So I just think that
so what you see there,
I'm not asking you, I'm asking the city why the city wouldn't, you know, suggest some alternatives where you have potentially a larger footprint, but there's housing built over it. I understand the timeline and individual fundraising needs, but if housing is really so important with 75% of, this is a question for the city and not the Whitney really, is why the Whitney has 75% and housing only has 15.
And I will leave the city to answer. I'll just add one thing, Janine, that I think is also helpful as we think about the complexity of the sites too, is when you see something like 38,000 square feet, it's also, you know, a part of that footprint is beneath the High Line. So it's not all sort of created equal. Like, so a lot of that is underneath the High Line, which means it cannot really be used in quite the same ways as you might expect. Some of that also, as I said, involves seeding existing part of our existing space to then make it happen. So there's complexity to it that doesn't fully answer your question. I'm just saying it's not quite a traditional footprint or site plan in the ways that you might think of it. And then I'll pass to the city to answer more fully.
Thank you.
Sure. So I'll just add a couple of points. I think that it is very much fitting, you know, as I started the presentation with, the vision of achieving multiple uses off of one project. We believe that, you know, housing is stackable, which you've heard from the Whitney, you know, their priority is, you know, larger floor plates. I think also we envision efficiencies with a 10,000 square foot floor plate that Kevin may be able to speak more to, just around maximizing the number of units per floor and just design and construction efficiencies for a 10,000 square foot floor plate of that shape. So I think those, and then also I think for a tall, skinnier building, you know, you're going to see less of an impact when it comes to things like shadows, as opposed to, let's say, an alternative of potentially two shorter buildings that will cast wider and more consistent shadows throughout the day. And I think that those are some of the factors that we considered when we were looking for a site plan that worked for all of us. Okay, so Catherine, you're next.
Hi, my name's Catherine Schoonover. I live on Washington Street between Bethune and Bank Streets, across from West Beth. I think the notion that a 60-story building on the site, even if it is a comparatively small floor plate, is still going to be incredibly obtrusive and stick out like a sore thumb, and totally inappropriate to the district and the area. I also find it very troubling that the city is involved in building market rate housing. I think I understand the arguments that have been made. I just feel that there has got to be some other way that affordable housing can be built by the city and not without building market rate housing, and that could cut the building in half height wise. The other thing that you just made a comment, the per speaker from the EDC made a comment that, we thought it would be better to build one really, really tall building than to build two shorter buildings. Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, even 30 stories is probably taller by quite a bit than the Standard Hotel, which was a real shock when it was built. I do find the fact that the Whitney is expanding by more than 100% to be kind of jaw-dropping, but I also know that the Whitney had a right of first refusal on the entire site. So the fact that they're not exercising it, I guess, counts as restraint. I mean, I'm a member of the Whitney and certainly a fan, but I do think that it's a pretty big expansion. But I guess, that's what they think they need. And I don't know whether it's the end of their expansions or this is just another, it'll just keep expanding and expanding. But I just find the 60-story building to be just unpalatable. And I think the principle of the city building market rate housing is shameful.
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to continue to go down the list. We're going to go Federica and then Elizabeth.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Couple of quick questions. ID just said that some of the Whitney square footage is under the High Line. I wondered, is that what's called the public access area? That's question number one. Question number two is, will this residential project be eligible for any of the billions of dollars thrown off by the recent City of Yes negotiations? And does the EDC plan to apply for any of that money that could be used towards this project? Thanks.
ID, do you want to address? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know what a public access area is, so those were a little more steeped in sort of city real estate.
Well, I understood that there were two arrangements that the city had made with the Whitney. One was for the space that we're talking about,
Mhm.
and another one was for something called the public access area, which is under the High Line. And I'm not sure if it's near the current entrance or whether it's under the High Line along Washington Street. So I was looking for some, I
Mm,
think probably Gigi can answer that one better. Can you, Gigi?
mhm.
No, I think you're referring to a previous slide we had where there was, like little asterisks where there were public access areas. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, I know there's paperwork for two different deals. One is public access area and one is the site that we're talking about. But if you don't know the answer, perhaps you could look it up.
Yeah,
and
we
we
don't,
can-
I think the answer here is we don't know right now, but we're happy to look into it
Right,
and get back
right.
to you.
So,
And then
you know,
if I
so
under,
we're
sorry,
listening,
go ahead.
we're hearing about these $2 billion, $4 billion, $5 billion that the mayor added to the city of Yes to get that passed.
Mhm.
And it's money that's supposed to go for housing, so it just seems like a logical question to ask if this project is eligible for it, if EDC is eligible, and if EDC intends to go after that money.
Sure. So the answer to that question is that with utilizing a cross subsidy model, the intent is not to provide any additional subsidy for this project. So the intent here is not to apply for it
Right.
based
But-
on
But
the cross subsidy
if
model.
everything you're hearing from the community, the input that you're looking for from the community is directing you towards more affordable, a different model, then it would be a shame to let that money, go begging if it were able to be used for this project.
Yep, I hear you, and we it's noted.
Thanks.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Yes, hi. My name's
Hi.
Elizabeth, and I also have been a long-term resident of the neighborhood, and I'm a member of the Whitney. And
Thank you.
I like many of the other speakers tonight, am vehemently against the 60 stories. I think it's way out of context in the building. I find it very disappointing too that we have so many luxury apartments being added to the community. I also fear that there's not enough schools in the neighborhood really to accommodate these families or an efficient hospital. But I also was wondering, my question is as well, is why can't, since it's, the history of the neighborhood is so intertwined with the arts, how come we can't have more housing, a smaller building, first of all, that houses artists like Westbeth did, or other, Soho areas that gave artists spaces to work, or Mitchell-Lama type of housing, which probably would be more in tune with the origins of the neighborhood as well. Restrict it perhaps to that community since it's next to the Whitney. I also wanted to ask if with the 485X tax program, does that include also tax breaks on real estate taxes for the developer? So
Take
that's
yours, Gigi.
Yep, Kevin, can you answer the 485X question?
yes.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So the 485X is just the term for the part of the code that governs real estate tax abatements for new development in New York City.
Yes.
It along with it has requirements for affordability, and we'll be following that program, in both respects, that the property tax abatement that will make available to the developer, as well as the affordability requirements that we'll impose.
So in other words, you're going to get a tax abatement for the affordable housing, as well as getting more space, more height, and more apartments on public land.
That's correct.
Okay, just wanted to confirm that.
Right, and on the artist housing piece, I think we come into challenges with the Fair Housing Act on designating housing for particular classes of individuals, and so that was not that was a challenge that was raised with artist housing.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you. Next will be Michelle Herman, followed by Josh Spodak.
Hi, I'm actually not Michelle Herman. I'm using her Jonathan Kuhn. I'm speaking as a private citizen, not in any public capacity. I've lived 3 blocks south of the site, west of Washington Street for the past 40 years, so very familiar with the neighborhood. When I came to it, it was largely light industry, and the meat park district had 217 active businesses. I support also the comments made about the sheer height of the building being inappropriate to the district. My neighbor is Joe Hamilton, and with Florent worked years to designate that district. It became a high-end fashion district. It once was a food supplier district, and that's what attracted me in part to the neighborhood. I wonder whether you've considered for this site affordable food, an affordable market, which would also conform to the historic uses of the site, which is something in great need. At this moment, we're more than half a mile from any affordable food. Those of us who have lived for a long time on the edge of the community and used to buy our food within the district, now landmarked. Also, as a matter of the side facing the highway side, I have used that for 40 years by bike or on foot on an almost daily basis. With the reconfiguration of the highway, West Side Highway in the mid-1990s, and the change of direction of traffic flow within the district to accommodate the meatpackers, actually, our building was literally taken off the grid in terms of bicycle access. There's no legal capacity to return to our home, and there's no legal way on surface roads to bike north of us to connect to 10th Avenue. I would hope that whatever project goes forward at the site takes into account the connections on the upland side of the highway for bikers who don't wish to go outside across the highway and to go to 8 blocks north. And there's opportunities to integrate the traffic in a more appropriate way for pedestrians and bicycling use. Vis-a-vis the question you posed about the AMI, I think this building should be certainly 50% or more affordable housing, whatever size it may be. At the moment, it seems way out of size in comparison to the immediate landmark districts around it. But within that, I would also say that you should support the lower end of the AMI, 60% or lower, maybe 40%, since that came up earlier. Clearly, I understand the urgency of housing. And again, I want to reiterate the historic uses of food and the very great need, especially if we're going to build more housing in the district, for affordable food sources in this area. And here, this is a city on site whose historic use was the supplying of food. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. So we are open to suggestions on ground floor uses. And so hearing that you want, food retail, supermarkets is very helpful. You are correct in that there are connectivity challenges, both pedestrian and bicycle access along 10th Avenue now. There's actually no sidewalk even. We have begun conversations with the City Department of Transportation on thinking about what a more holistic, public realm improvement plan would look like. Again, both in and around the site. So those are things that we are thinking about and appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe I said the next person would be Josh, followed by Ted Warner.
Hey, making sure you can hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi, so Joshua Spodak. I live on Greenwich Avenue, lived here a little over 25 years. I was there yesterday and spoke in person. And after it ended, I realized that a couple people there said that they want affordable housing so that they can have people in the neighborhood to work with them, like nannies or maids, or to work at the restaurants and be able to not have to go all over the city just to get to work. And it occurred to me that this seems to me, for them to have someone else subsidize their quality of life, seems to me, on the face of it, first, undemocratic. That if they can't afford their quality of life, they could live more simply, or they could move away, which would, perks like this are what raise the rents in the first place. So it seems to be distorting the market to raise the costs that this is supposed to lower. I mention this also because the High Line and the Whitney, also, if they can't afford to do things, it's kind of weird for a park to say we need more money. Parks are supposed to be green space that doesn't take more money and more space. What I'm getting at, a bigger picture here, is that it seems like, also I should mention that the people who go into the luxury space, if they want people to work with them, they're probably going to want to use that space for their people. And why not? Because they're paying for it. The feel is that these projects seem to be creating as much demand or more than they're solving. It feels like this is like the bureaucracy expanding to meet the needs of the expanded bureaucracy. Meanwhile, if this space were actually used for park space, or, well, for one thing, that would benefit everyone. I mean, as to whatever extent we need housing, we're also missing green space and trees and plants and things that grow on their own. There's parks in that neighborhood, the Little Island, the Hudson River, the High Line, and they are mostly pavement. There's not a lot of green space, let alone something like a farmer's market or or community gardens, which would, the local community pays for these things through their own labor and enjoy. So I don't see this as resolving the problem it's claiming to, and it seems to be by forcing these subsidies to lead to this super tall building. Now, getting to the tall building, again, yesterday, I remarked that if you're hearing the feedback that that building is a problem, there should be something in this presentation that mentions that. And again, in the presentation, you guys did not mention that the height of this building. And you're just saying, oh, it's just the envelope. If everyone's objecting to it, put that front and center. I said yesterday that I found that lack of presenting this as dishonest and not credible and deceptive. And to this, I would add now also the whole process of adding new floors or claiming this is resolving housing crisis seems undemocratic. It's not obvious that it's actually lowering the demand for housing. It may be increasing it. As we see that the High Line, once it got space, wants more space. The Whitney has space, now it wants more space. And lastly, people keep referring to housing as a crisis. And they say this is just something, we must meet this crisis. But there's no mention of the limit of what this crisis, of what this claimed crisis is. If there really is no limit to what we must do, whatever it takes to create more housing, why not put it in Central Park? Why not put it in Flushing Meadows? Now, clearly, we aren't going to put new buildings into Central Park and Flushing Meadows. So there is a limit. We should state that limit. And in my view, this is over that limit for people who live here and has what made this space what it is and what makes it in demand. Someone said earlier that building would stick out like a sore thumb. To me, it would stick out like a middle finger. So it seems, okay, undemocratic, seems to be creating the problems it claims to solve or exacerbating them, and takes the place of what could be actual green space, which the local parks do not provide. Thank you.
Ted?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Yeah, I have a question for ID at the Whitney. I really love the Whitney, and it's been a really important part of my education. And I live in the Village, and I live about 2 blocks from the Whitney. So thank you so much. And
Thank
the
you.
Whitney, yeah, thanks. The Whitney provides public services to millions of people, as you said, which is orders of magnitude more than the skyscraper proposes to serve. And the city will contribute the land for free to the luxury skyscraper, but the Whitney will have to pay full price market rate for the land. Why can't the Whitney have the land for free? And I also wanted to know, you said that the Whitney has historically needed to expand about every 25 years. So in 25 years from now, how will it expand when there's a skyscraper occupying the same lot? And what makes giving up your rightful space to a luxury residential building necessary in this expansion? Why would the Whitney not take up the entire lot?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you for your generous comments about the Whitney, and thanks for being both a neighbor and a supporter. You ask a lot of philosophical and existential questions, and I think fundamentally is the acknowledgement that we all exist in a community, and no one institution, no one organization, no one need exists in isolation. Yes, you know, the Whitney has expanded many times over the years in ways that were both foreseen and unforeseen. We do not own the site next door. It's public land, as you mentioned, even though we have a right to it, a right of first offer. And the truth is that this is not unencumbered property, even if the city owns it. It has, you know, one of the parks, one of the sort of foremost parks in our city and in the world adjacent to it, with spaces, you know, on a part of it. It's got the museum, of course, and it exists in a city where, you know, housing is a priority for the administration. So really, you know, the Whitney's role is obviously to think about the needs of the Whitney long term, but to think about that in the context of what else is happening around us. We don't call the shots unilaterally. And I don't think any of the stakeholders calls the shots unilaterally in that way. And so, you know, your question about why not get the land for free. As a nonprofit, a cultural institution, of course, we'd love to get the land for free. I will say, though, that there's a distinction. The Whitney will own the site. We own the site we are on currently. We will own the site that we acquire as a part of this project as well, which is different than what the arrangement will be for the residential tower, which Kevin and others can speak to. So there is a transfer of ownership. And so, you know, I don't think that the city actually is legally able to just transfer land to a private entity or a nonprofit like the Whitney at no cost. That said, the land does serve the public good, and the public good, I think, will require, ideally, you know, we firmly believe at the Whitney that for a community to thrive and to work well, you've got to find a way to have 1 + 1 = more than 2. And that's what we hope that this project will be if it's done right across the needs that it's intending to serve.
Thank you for your question, Ted.
Thank you.
I'll just maybe add on just a little bit about the economics of the housing site. Again, I think it's important to note that we haven't released an RFP. We haven't negotiated with any developer, so we don't know yet what that financial arrangement will look like. But one way to think about it is the cost of that land for any developer is providing affordable housing to this community and to the city. And the developers will compete with one another in how much affordability they can provide. So the city may not be getting financial returns from a developer, but you know the price is the affordable housing that these developers will be delivering.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up are Arturo and then Marianne.
Hi, folks. Arturo Fernandez here, CB2 board member, acting in my capacity as a private citizen. So I just also agree with somebody else who noted earlier that the RFP process should be delayed since the EDC has largely ignored the community and its input in this process. Instead, the current proposal has been primarily based on input from only a handful of entities, none of which truly represent New Yorkers who are in need of affordable and market rate housing. Another point I'd like to make is that I think the New York City community desires and deserves a plan that maximizes the number of units in the plan by expanding the footprint of housing to build more housing. I know before this, there have been some reasons, either by the architect or by the Whitney, in terms of not expanding the housing footprint due to, I think, points were made about shadows and air, but those don't seem to hold water, especially since the area is in an AE flood zone. And from my understanding, there have been changes in policies, especially after Hurricane Sandy, that would disallow the creation of housing units and floors that are not at a sufficiently tall height. So my first question is, could you provide more clarity on are there any legal reasons, or is this purely an aesthetic choice to create the buffer between the housing building and the Whitney?
Kevin, do you want to speak to a little bit as to the purpose and the thinking around the open space between the housing site and the Whitney?
Sure. Yeah, I think it serves a few purposes. It does provide light and air for the residential building at all of the floors. So that's a key consideration for the housing. The slender profile does result in fewer shadows. But I think importantly, and I'll let ID speak to this more, is that open space is intended to serve as a new front door of the Whitney Museum. So it was a key consideration for both of the parties. ID, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, that's right. I think you summarized it right, Kevin. I think it serves multiple purposes. There's also I'll talk about the sort of possible sort of welcoming entryway to a future museum, but also there was the strong desire on the part of the parties to have these various uses and projects be able to proceed independently of each other. So that separation also allows, the residential piece to proceed and be realized in a timeline that will likely be before either the High Line or the Whitney. We don't have an expansion designed yet. We don't have an architect yet. We have not raised the money to do it. And of course, priority for the city is delivering not just delivering housing, but delivering housing as quickly as is feasible. So that separation serves that. The light and air easement between the buildings also is really important. I think by zoning requirements, you would need some space for the south-facing windows on the residential tower anyway, which would require it, if not at ground level, certainly above a certain height. And then one of the big constraints of the building we have right now, as I said, is circulation, but also having an effective entrance that works for the multiple functions that we have. So there's a world in which, we may maintain the entrance we have right now to serve more of our educational programs and have an entrance on the north side. That the open space allows for that possibility as well. It also allows for the possibility of much of the outdoor programming that we do in that space. So it would be an activated and programmed space. It also, I think, followed the ethos of ensuring that that the site maintains sort of that quality of public realm that the neighborhood is so well known for, in that it creates a welcoming experience for pedestrians, for visitors to the park, visitors to the Whitney, visitors to the neighborhood, whether or not they go into any of the buildings. So there's a lot of that consideration that it allows for that possibility, even though buildings themselves have not been designed.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Arturo, for your question.
Okay. Yeah. So then just like the follow-up comment that I had is that it seems like a lot of this is benefiting the Whitney, open space for a new entrance for the Whitney, open space for potential activations for the Whitney. I think if the Whitney truly cares about the New York City community, they shouldn't just they should be promoting more housing in this project as a public good. I think I think all of us here probably will say really good things about the Whitney. We love the Whitney in many ways, and we appreciate having them in our community. But I think a lot of this space that's being taken up by the Whitney actually should be going to housing. So and unfortunately, that's just how it is. It's a zero-sum game on this lot. And I think a lot more should be going to housing.
Thank you. Marianne.
I'm Marianne Arisman, and I'm chair of the St. Luke's Place Block Association. And I just had two comments on all of the all that has gone on. In terms of the process that you described, it just seems rushed, and it seems designed to limit the input of the community to very, very specific questions. I attended earlier meetings. I attended tonight. Your presentation was almost identical to the earlier presentations. Didn't seem as if you had taken any of the community input and made any changes or even acknowledged the input. You've designed this these meetings during a holiday and very bad winter weather. It would seem that it could have been better done if you spread them out a little bit so that people had more of a chance to attend your hearings and meetings. And the other point I'd like to make is that the building is just too tall. If you really want to address the crises in affordable housing, make the whole thing affordable and lower it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marianne. So I have I have more hands up. Eugene and then Irene.
Hi, thank you, Gigi. I'm a member of CB2. My question is, however, just as a neighbor and resident of Community District 2, it's a question about the financing for the project. I've heard that 45X, I've heard it referred to as, the tax code for real estate tax abatements. Could you confirm that the 45X program is a replacement for the 421A program, and that it provides a property tax exemption for the developer? And if so, what is the period of time for that tax exemption? Is it 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? And will the affordable housing remain affordable for that same time period, or is it meant to be in perpetuity? And then last, similar to the 421A program, will market rate as well as affordable housing be subject to rent stabilization? Thanks.
Kevin, do you want to answer that?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Eugene. Thanks for the question. You're correct. That is the real estate property tax exemption tax code reference. The abatement under 485X varies. There is no one set abatement schedule under the 485X program. For a project of this size in this area, I believe it is a 40-year abatement, maybe 35 years. We can get back to you on that. And to the question of permanent affordability, I believe that's something we're still discussing internally, and we've heard that that's key consideration for the community.
Okay, thanks. And the last question was whether the market rate as well as affordable housing is going to be subject to rent stabilization. I think in 421A, both of them were subject to rent stabilization. Is that the case for 485X?
I believe so.
I think we have to get back to you on that, Eugene.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Me?
The next speakers are Irene Kaufman and then Susan Wittenberg.
Hi, I find it ironic that not very long ago, the Whitney did a spectacular exhibit about Hopper and Hopper's New York, and that amazing moment where you could step on the balcony and look out, and for a great portion of it, the look out that window was still very much like what Hopper used to paint, and that you're not more invested in protecting the historic district when it is ground zero for the works of Hopper and inspiration to many others. Also, the Whitney is built on land that was originally owned by the city. And when we were looking to get a new school built, because there's a shortage of schools, we were actually lied to and told that there was no city-owned land, and there was, and a deal was made behind closed doors for the Whitney to get it. I love the Whitney, but we are owed a good deed by the city because of having done that. So it has to be all affordable housing. It has to be contextual. Do not desecrate the aesthetics of the area when they are historic. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Irene. Susan?
Hello, thank you. I am on board member of a CB2 and on the land use committee as well, but I will speak as a private citizen of this area. At the first meeting we had at the Morton Street School, I actually asked the first question because we were very unfamiliar with this plan at that time. And my question was, why are we only getting this teeny little corner in the northwest part for housing when this is city-owned land? We then have learned everything that has been discussed at all these meetings, which is, in fact, that was not the case, and the deal with the Whitney, et cetera. But I find this meeting tonight and listening and some of the others that the tone of everyone who's speaking is very quiet and it's very polite. But I want to speak for the feeling and the people I know and the people maybe who aren't here tonight, which is unbelievable sense of outrage and anger over this project. And there is no one who lives around here who doesn't feel betrayed by this. There's no one who thinks that this giant tower that maybe will get 50% affordable housing, and you're still discussing if it's going to be permanent, will even happen in that amount, which is an outrage. So I know you've said, oh, we're going to listen, oh, we're going to listen, but there's no listening. We don't believe what you're saying. We believe this is all just being rammed down our throats. And I think you need to understand how angry people are when you go ahead and do this and trot all over the community. So I wish there were 1,000 community members on this bitter cold night here speaking and yelling, but that's not happening. And Gigi, you certainly remember the outrage at the Soho NoHo rezoning. Well, let me tell you, there's even more outrage at this. And after those other kinds of development processes that we've been through when the community didn't get what they asked for, that's why people have stopped showing up, because they've lost faith in the process. And that's exactly what's happening here. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for your comments. I want to be mindful of time. It is 6:30. I know that there are some hands up, but I believe everyone has had an opportunity to speak once. I see 4 Joanne Castillo, so I don't know if it's the same person or a different person. I'm just going to unmute, and if you could just let me know if you are wanting to speak, if you're a different person, or
Can you
why
hear me?
there's. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, who's speaking?
This is Andrew Berman. I've had
Oh,
my hand
hi,
up the
Andrew.
entire time and have not been called.
I'm sorry, you didn't come up, but feel free to speak now.
Great, thank you. So my name is Andrew Berman, and I'm speaking on behalf of Village Preservation. I just have to say there's so many things about this proposal that are outrageous. First, that EDC would have a public engagement period that lasts just a month with the holidays in between. You're hearing overwhelmingly in these meetings and from thousands of communications you're receiving that this oversized tower full of super luxury housing is unacceptable. What are you doing with public feedback that you are receiving, and what changes are being made? The justifications for this ridiculous plan are equally unbelievable. EDC claims that they must include hundreds of units of luxury housing to pay for the affordable housing here because it will be quicker than having the city fund it directly. That is untrue. Just a dozen blocks to the south, it's been 9 years and counting that we've been waiting for a similarly funded development that's supposed to include affordable housing at Washington and Houston Streets. Not a single unit there has been created. Private developments can take years or even decades to reach completion, including ones with cross subsidies exactly like this. It's simply untrue to say putting a private developer in charge will make it move more quickly. As further evidence, less than 10 blocks away at 388 Hudson Street, the city has repeatedly claimed that a 100% affordable housing development funded by HPD will move very swiftly, and yet at the same time claims that a similar funding scheme here would be hopelessly mired in delays. You can't make both arguments. They can't both be true. And even if it were true, it's a completely unacceptable excuse for taking this highly objectionable route to funding this project to say that the city is too slow and too inefficient to move the project along at a reasonable pace on its own. The final disingenuous argument for basing this development on 300 to 450 units of super luxury housing on public land is that there's insufficient funds to directly pay for such projects publicly. And you glided over in your presentation the fact that only 1/4 or 150 of these units are actually required to be affordable. The city just agreed to an additional $4 billion in funding for affordable housing as part of the City of Yes deal. What better place to spend a tiny fraction of that money than here? The land is being provided for free, and 485X subsidies are being offered for the affordable housing to be built. Luxury housing on precious public land like this is unacceptable. Finally, regarding the 800-pound gorilla here, which is the 600-foot tall tower with up to 75% super luxury housing, that the city would even propose such a scheme and scale is an indication of how far we have sunk. We all agree that a lack of affordable housing is a real crisis facing our city. What we disagree about is that hundreds of units of incredibly unaffordable housing or a ludicrously out-of-scale tower is the way to solve it. Buildings near this site rise to no more than 200 or so feet, or roughly 1/3 the height proposed here, and those are the tallest surrounding buildings. The very uncontextual Standard Hotel next door is about 265 feet tall, still less than half the size of this proposed sore thumb. And it should be noted that your images showing building envelopes are entirely inaccurate because it does not show the tower as being almost 2.5 times the height of the neighboring Standard Hotel. There's a very simple solution here. Get rid of all the super luxury apartments and just build the 150 to 300 units of affordable housing, thereby reducing the height of the building by 1/2 to 3/4. Don't tell us that will take longer because we know from experience privately financed developments that include affordable housing can take many years or even decades. And don't tell us there's no money for it when you just secured up to $4 billion additional dollars for funding affordable housing. And finally, don't call this a public engagement process unless you're actually going to listen and respond to what the public has to say. And I want to note that in addition to myself, Juan Rivero, also from Village Preservation, has been waiting on the line this entire time to be called upon. So I hope he will also be called.
Thank you, Andrew. And we have been in receipt of your letters and correspondence, and we look forward to a continued dialogue with you as this project moves forward. Juan, I don't see your name here. Are you under a different name? Hold on.
There seem to be a number of Joanne Castillos.
Yeah, there's like 5 Joanne Castillos, and I don't know if you're one of, I just unmuted another Joanne Castillo. Are you?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Alex Hoyer. I'm similarly, there must be some issue with the Zoom. I haven't spoken either and would love the chance to provide a comment and ask you questions. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so I wanted to just thank EDC and thanks to Whitney and the Highline for the presentation. I think it's been super interesting, and I'm strongly in favor of the proposal. I think this is a super exciting opportunity to build more housing when we desperately need more housing all across the city. And I think a lot of the cases that were like in kind of comments that have been provided today around kind of what's characteristic of the neighborhood, I do think that ultimately it's really important for all neighborhoods to be kind of contributing to the housing crisis in this city. And I am really excited for kind of more folks to get the opportunity to live in a neighborhood as amazing as the Meatpacking District. I ran by the Whitney on the West Side Highway this morning. And I think it's just like really wonderful that more people will get the opportunity to experience living in the neighborhood and experience all that is in the area. And I think also, I just think that like as a member of the Whitney, I think the expansion of the Whitney is also very exciting. And so kind of looking forward to the plans that the museum has as well. I think the kind of one question, and I would imagine this would maybe come up in the RFP, is just around kind of what the commercial space will be used for. I think there was a comment earlier around kind of how the neighborhood has, like, the commercial space has developed into, you know, like kind of high fashion shops and retail spaces of that nature. And so when we were, I think there was a mention that you will be looking for local retail or potentially a kind of community center or a community area. I think having more clarity on that would be super interesting, because I think there's like a great opportunity here for us to kind of really bolster the type of space that's available in the ground level. So just want to say I'm really excited and kind of really think that this strikes the right balance between affordability and market rate, that I think obviously it'll get sorted in the RFP, but I kind of, from seeing these projects develop, seems like kind of the type of project that could get developed and get momentum. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. There will be ground floor space that is set aside. We are looking for input as to what community members think would be a good use, and I think community use as well as retail or any specific type of retail, that is the kind of feedback we're looking for. There's two more folks. There's another Joanne Castillo that I'm going to unmute, and then there's an Ann Mitchell-Tree, and then I believe that means everyone who has raised their hand should have been able to speak at least once. So let me unmute.
Did the last caller live in the neighborhood? I'm just curious.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you just identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jackie Ottman, not Joanne Castillo. I actually thank you for taking my call. It's a little hard to go after Andrew Berman, who seemed to have said it all. I don't live in the neighborhood, but my family worked here for 5 generations. My family had a meat purveying firm here in the Meatpacking District between 1918 and 1986. I worked in the business as a 13-year-old in 1968. And today I help to preserve the history of the Meatpacking District. I wrote a book, and I give in-person and walking tours and in-person lectures. My big takeaway from attending last evening's session in person was the extremely deep objection to the proposed height of that residential building, which would not only dwarf the Standard Hotel, but the Whitney and the High Line. It's hard for me to believe that as design experts, they would approve of this residential building as proposed. You had asked for input on architectural cues. Something that hasn't been mentioned in this tonight or last night was the respect for the very unique and long history of your site. As some of you may know on the call, and maybe others may not, the neighborhood mirrors the entire history of New York City, starting with the Lenape people who built a trading post here over 400 years ago. very land under your proposed building was once the site of a War of 1812 military fort, and it was followed by the Gansevoort Farmers Market in the latter half of the 19th century, and across the street was the West Washington Market, the reason why this area became the center of the meatpacking industry in New York City and a very, very important economic driver at the time. The entire neighborhood was landmarked in 2007, largely because of its special history and also because all the components work together as a unit. The Belgian block streets, the metal canopies, the low-slung buildings which preserve the views, and the sweeping streetscapes. And importantly, the fact that many of the architecturally stunning buildings that were built over a century or more ago have been preserved through the practice of adaptive reuse. Now, I'm not suggesting adaptively reusing the current Gansevoort Market building, because since that likely can't be done if you suggested, but it's extra important to carefully consider what type of buildings will replace the Gansevoort Market Meat Center and how they'll integrate with the rest of the neighborhood, as well as demonstrate appropriate respect for its history. So I respectfully submit that doing this project appropriately may require that you rethink the number of objectives you're trying to achieve here and consider a scaled back project that befits the neighborhood's history, context, and scale. Thank you.
So we have actually 4 more people that need to speak, and it's 6:46. So I just urge people to be brief if possible. And then I'm going to end the session. So I have Anne, and then Juan, Mar Fitzgerald, and then Mr. Novak. So these will be our 4 final speakers.
Hi, this is Anne. Can you hear me?
Yes, Anne, we can hear you.
Hi, hey, you know, I've been watching the Landmarks Committee meetings from CB2 for a long time, just as an innocent bystander. But I did hear someone on the previous program say that to the effect that aesthetics are not important, or that if it serves this, and this goal, then aesthetics be damned, just build it. And I just want to object strongly, and I just want to say to you, nothing could be farther than the truth. I've seen the Rocky Mountains, I've seen Mount Rushmore. I know that things can be permanent, short of if we get bombed by a foreign enemy, or if Mother Nature destroys this our city, this will last forever. And this is what I keep saying over and over again. I can't get people to figure out. You are about to spend huge amounts of money, huge amounts of time to create a thing that will last forever, long after we're gone. Now, if New York City can be the capital of the art world, where do we stand in the architectural world? It matters when people walk down the street and point to that thing and say, look at that ugly piece of crap. It hurts. When you allow, we're supposed to have the finest minds in the nation, the greatest artists in the nation, the best energy in the nation, on the planet, that we can't come up with a lasting, permanent design that makes people feel good instead of feel bad. There is a universal aesthetic. There are things that are charming. There are things that are graceful. There are things that are beautiful. There are things that are in context. And if you can't check off those boxes, graceful, beautiful, in context, historic, if you can't check off those boxes on your design plan, then you're making a huge mistake, and you're not fooling anybody. Everybody walks by, they look at it, they say, look at that ugly piece of crap. And we don't have to go on this way anymore. It's embarrassing that this government lags so far behind the great artists who actually live here. You have the best resources in the world, and I do not sanction that you make another huge architectural mistake. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you, Ann. Juan?
Can I say something? I don't know why my name is coming up as Joanne Castillo, but I'm not. My name, can
Go
you
ahead,
hear
you can
me?
speak. Yes, go ahead. You can speak, and then Juan, if you could go after her.
Okay, all right. I didn't want to break in or interrupt, but I've had my hand up, and anyhow, I live in Chelsea, and I walk on the High Line quite often to go to the Whitney, which I love. I'm just an ordinary person here. I'm not that conversant with the city processes and so on. And the picture that you showed this evening on the presentation that showed the site plan was the first that I had seen of it. I was shocked to see that the amount of space taken up by the Whitney extension looked, simply on looking at that plan, to be the same size as the actual Whitney building as it exists. And I would like to add my voice to the many voices who have talked about the fact that the city is giving away this land that is owned by the public. And it has to do that with a very deliberate and public process that goes into every aspect of doing that and planning it. This is probably not the place to bring up something as transformative as what I would like to bring up, but I think at some point the city has to start looking for more nonprofit developers instead of building luxury housing to quote unquote pay for the affordable housing that we need, and that the creative people who have made this city what it is need, so that they can live here and so they don't start spreading out to other parts of the country. I would also like to add, so I'm supporting the many other voices who have said similar things this evening. I would also like to talk briefly about the meatpacking aesthetic. And the awnings and so on and so forth, the low buildings, and paying attention to that. I believe that the Renzo Piano building of the Whitney did try to pay attention to the industrial aesthetic of the area. Anything that's built here, I would like to see would do that. And I would like to point out also that the Whitney is on the site of the historic Gansevoort pumping station that was used during the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, the tragic Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And there is not a marker anywhere on the site, or apparently not planned for this new site, to pay attention to that very important history. So thank you for letting me butt in. I don't know how my name got turned into Joanne Castillo. My name is Christine McVeigh. I'm in Chelsea. And I hope that there is more public input or more opportunities for public input to be brought to bear on this process, because this is a city of the people who live here. It shouldn't be a city for developers. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you for your patience. Juan?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, thank you very much. I'm Juan Rivero, Special Project Director at Village Preservation, following up on the comments by our Executive Director, Andrew Berman. And I want to speak to first the density of the housing portion of the development proposal, and then to the modest percentage of affordable housing in exchange for which you are asking us to accept this unprecedented scale of development. So first, it appears that this building would have a floor area ratio of 60. Until just this past year, it was illegal to build housing in New York City with a floor area ratio of more than 12. The mayor and the real estate industry successfully lobbied to get that 60-year-old rule changed, and now housing can be built up to a floor area ratio of 18 in New York City. But what is being proposed here is almost 3.5 times as dense as that. The Empire State Building, for comparison, has a floor area ratio of about 30, or roughly half the density of what's being proposed here. So how do you justify this level of density, and what sort of zoning do you propose that would allow it? And that's a question that we'd actually like an answer to. Second, we support affordable housing being included on the site, and only affordable housing, 100% and guaranteed permanently affordable. But I want to be clear about what that means. The affordability of what's being offered by the city for 25 to 50% of the units here is not really all that affordable. It's back to households that make on average 60% of area median income. About half of New York City households make below 60% of the area median income, which means that on average, they would not qualify for and would not be able to afford these units. And more than half of New York City renter households, those to whom this affordable housing is supposed to be directed at, make below 60% of the area median income. So an even larger percentage of New York City renters would not qualify for and would not be able to afford these affordable apartments. Will they be cheaper than market rate apartments in this neighborhood? Absolutely. But the public benefit here is actually quite modest, while what is being asked of the public and taken from the public and given to a developer is by comparison quite large. So just to reiterate what I think are the main points you're overwhelmingly hearing from the impacted community here. First, this outrageously tall tower needs to be reduced in height by 1/2 to 3/4. Second, all ultra expensive market rate housing must be eliminated. And third, any housing developed here must be 100% affordable and 100% guaranteed to remain affordable in perpetuity. Thank you very much.
Gigi, you're muted in the room.
Oh, great. I just gave you an answer that no one heard. So Juan, I said thank you for your comments. In regards to your question on FAR, we don't have a building design yet, so we don't have answers for you as it pertains to FAR. As it pertains to zoning, any changes in zoning would have to go through the ULURP process. So I think those answers are forthcoming as we move forward in the process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our last two speakers are Mar Fitzgerald and Mr. Novak. Go ahead, Mar.
Hi, my name is Mar Fitzgerald. I am a CB2 board member, but I'm speaking here for myself tonight as a lifelong resident of West Street, where I was born and raised, and I'm raising my family. It's about 900 feet from this proposed monstrosity. I want to echo what so many of our brave and dedicated village leaders like Andrew and Katie and Janine, Eugene, and Sue have said tonight. I'll be brief. Make it 100% affordable, with a significant percentage going to those most in need. Reduce the height by at least 1/3 across smaller buildings. Include plans for affordable goods and services for our many new neighbors that will come, schools, hospitals, groceries, and a true community give back must be included in return for this blatant land giveaway to the Whitney Museum, which brings in $100 million a year and has a very troubling racist past that has not been addressed. Additionally, the High Line's great, we all love it, but it's not for us. It's not for the people that live here. It's for the tourists. So if there are going to be giveaways for these two institutions, which are not so public, there needs to be something for the residents and for the incoming residents. I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you, Mar. And finally, Novak Nori. Mr. Nori? Can you hear?
Can you hear?
unmuted? Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for letting me speak once more. I didn't get all my questions in yesterday as I was the last person once again to speak. With that being said, Josh mentioned the FAR for the property that the meatpacking warehouse sits on that's existing right now as a two-story property. Your representative from the Whitney, the deputy, mentioned that there was 33,000 square feet under the High Line for residential occupation. Is that true? That's number one. Number two, the air rights above the meatpacking warehouse rooftop. What is the FAR that's on record that came from William Waldorf Astor, the titled owner originally, which is also the titled owner on my property, 51 Little West 12th Street, directly across the street? He's expressed, as I heard in meetings when the Dyer Arts in the Chelsea Museum was making a bid and a proposal to be exactly where the Whitney was, that they could not build on top of the Gansevoort meatpacking warehouse because Astor, William Waldorf, or one of the family members that took upon his will said that it would be restricted and not to be developed evermore, just to remain to be a two-story warehouse, import-export to the waterfront. And I sat and I listened to that in the meeting, and that stuck with me all these years. And I love the Whitney. I loved how they were able to, Renzo Piano, build actually a piano, terraces that look at my piano downstairs at 51 Little West 12th Street for my exhibit. And I love the High Line. And I know Hammond and Joshua very well. They used to run across my building when it was existing next to the High Line. And so could you clarify how many air rights that it had originally, how many air rights Whitney has in their pocket as a first refusal to build, and what is the extent of the air rights that they're going to build on that are going to block my property from having Hudson River views to the Statue of Liberty, which just devastated the value of my property ever since I saw this rendering less than 24 hours ago. Thirdly, if you want land that's available right now, where you will have less of a feedback in the community, there's land available right on my corner between Little West 12th Street and 13th Street that has been available ever since Mars Disco or Mars Nightclub and the meatpackers have went bankrupt, and I believe city, state, or federal government took over the block through property from Little West 12th Street to 13th Street. Why don't you take that property and do something with it? It's waterfront, water view. You could have both residents, artists, unaffordable living. And I believe that the residents of the West Village will be less against you taking a property that could be used for its ultimate height and value, where it won't be obstructing the waterfront, which is going to obstruct the waterfront from the High Line, because the High Line Resolution Chapter 8, Chelsea Resolution Chapter 8 says that no property should block the water view space between the High Line bed railing and the Hudson. So you're violating a big law that you created. And Astor, William Waldorf Astor and John Jacob Astor, you know, we'd be rolling over in their grave if they were alive today. I'm pretty sure they'd be raising their hands saying, no, don't do that. Or if you're going to do that, make it so that you could see the waterfront. And I just ask you, I know I'm a little drop in a basket. I know long last, the city council is going to give you their blessing to do whatever you want to do, because yes, we need affordable living. And I'm wholeheartedly with that. But you have to think about other people in the community and the fabric and the morality of what the meatpacking in the West Village means. We're artists. We're artists that live in our own residence. Why don't you also open up a part for unaffordable artists in residence that need to be able to continue their art and also make a living and living in the area of whatever they do and live in the community that they belong in. This is what the New York City spirit is about going forward in 2025 to keep the artist community alive. And I thank you very much for letting me speak. Please clarify what the air rights and the FAR has divided between the Whitney and what they have in their pocket and what's allowable. Happy New Year.
Thank you, Mr. Nori. I think we're going to have to follow up with you specifically on the FAR and air rights question. That's not information that we have readily available, but I know that you and I have spoken offline, and we can continue to address some of your concerns, your specific concerns separately. With that, I want
Excuse me,
to.
Ms. Lee, could I just briefly follow up on the question that Andrew Berman asked and see if we can get an answer? You've had 3 public engagement sessions now. You've had an extensive resolution from Community Board 2. What process will you use to incorporate the feedback that you've received into the upcoming RFP? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll just conclude by saying that we will be taking all these comments into consideration. We have heard that we have heard an overwhelming concern around height and the height of the building and context that will be brought back and discussed with the city and the city project team. We wanted to have a series of these public engagement sessions in advance of releasing the RFP so that we can, make adjustments as it develops. So I think we will continue to have these conversations. And again, I just want to thank you everyone for taking the time out of their day to join us. Some of you who've joined us on more than one of these information sessions. And that we look forward to continue working with you and having conversations as this project progresses. So with that, I'm just going to close the meeting. And again, thank you for your patience and have a good evening.